Hi, this video is going to be a sort of follow-up to a video that I uploaded a few days ago where I talked about how I have managed to learn and run complex campaign settings throughout the years. The link will be in the description, so if you want to check that video out, I recommend it because this video is going to build upon the things that I talked in that video. In that video, there were a couple of comments that caught my attention. One was made by Orvos Horizon Fire. He was planning this campaign featuring a megatropolis, this huge city that separated itself from its motherland. So it's going to be a campaign featuring espionage, intrigue. I think it's going to be fantasy themed. It could also work as a science fantasy campaign too. So I think I'll give you my general opinion on that because Orvos asked how I would handle such a campaign. So I'm going to give a general opinion on how I would manage things. The other comment was made by Diéfersom from the Solosfera RPG channel. And I am going to put the links to their channels in the description below. So Diéfersom expressed his interest in running campaigns featuring the Star Wars universe, Game of Thrones, but he also talked about how he felt sometimes a bit paralyzed or frozen because of the enormity of the settings. So I wanted to give my opinion on that as well. Let's start with Orvos's comment, the megatropolis thing. I think that what I discussed in my other video still applies to that situation, but something that I identified as a sort of similarity between what Orvos presented as a campaign situation and what Diéfersom talked about, and it's that both situations seem to me like composite campaign settings. It feels like, in the case of the Orvos, the Megatropolis situation, it feels like a mini campaign setting within another campaign setting. The Megatropolis could very well be treated as a mega dungeon. I think in the future I should bring out a video where I talk about mega dungeons. But like I said, in this case you have this Megatropolis and the motherland and the rest of the campaign world. So it feels like a setting, the Megatropolis, within a setting, the greater campaign world and the motherland. So you need to apply a bit of simultaneous play, planning and strategizing on how you're going to handle that campaign. You may remember from my other video where I talked about how you could use an adventure module, a purchased adventure module, to build some connections from that module to the rest of the campaign world. And on the other hand, you could create your own adventure and make connections from the outside of that campaign module, that is zooming out and creating a sort of circle around the campaign module, using it as its center, as the center of the circle. And then you start to form connections from the outside world, from everything outside of the campaign module, how things are connected through non-player characters, objects and places with the center of that particular story. So in this case, I would recommend that you constantly alternate between the Megatropolis and the motherland and the rest of the campaign setting. That is, let's group the motherland with the rest of the game world. So maybe you decide to start with the Megatropolis. Think about the people living in the Megatropolis. Do they have families, friends, or enemies in the motherland or in some other place in the campaign world? How will those people react to those non-player characters staying within the Megatropolis as it makes its separation? Maybe it's just a political separation, but depending on the setting, maybe it's quite literal. Maybe some sort of complicated machinery and devices have been placed in key parts of the megatropolis, and maybe now the city is a floating city and it's just lifting up, separating itself from the motherland through magic or through weird science. So you need to think about how the relationships between the characters living within the megatropolis and those outside of the megatropolis are going to be affected by that. Not only in terms of physical distance, but also ideological distance. Their interactions are going to be somewhat limited, or they are going to take new forms through messages, through, like I said, if there's magic, maybe through connected crystal balls or spheres or something like that. If it's slightly more realistic, to keep those interactions alive, maybe they will have to move between the megatropolis and the motherland when they are not being watched. What if there is some sort of system, some sort of curfew, or they are prohibiting people from interacting with those that stay in the megatropolis or outside of it? All of those things could serve for adventures and side quests. Maybe you need to facilitate those interactions with the non-player characters living inside the megatropolis and outside. Maybe because there are some enmities, the attacks are going to be a bit more aggressive, because now that the megatropolis has separated itself from the rest of the political and geographical entity and situation, those enemies will never know if they will get their chance to have their revenge or any sort of plan related to their rivals, enemies, or their nemesis, etc. And what about objects? What if there are some vehicles or machines within the megatropolis that require very specialized replacement parts or parts for repairs that can only be obtained in the motherland or in other parts of the game world? Will they be able to obtain those parts from the motherland, smuggle them inside of the city? Will they be able to make some connections, establish new trade routes with other places, other nations, other kingdoms, other cities, to obtain the parts that they need, the objects, the substances? It could be applied to anything, to potions, medical equipment, anything related to alchemy or chemistry, etc. And then we also have the places themselves. Now that the megatropolis has separated itself, maybe it has some more freedom or restriction for the inhabitants of the megatropolis to go into different adventure sites. And what about the other nation cities and everything else? Maybe now that the megatropolis is separated from the motherland, they want to create a sort of alliance or some business deals with the megatropolis. Or maybe they want to take advantage of the megatropolis. They think that it is no longer protected by the motherland and it is vulnerable, ripe for the taking, for invasion. I would recommend that you keep making these connections until you feel a bit stuck. You feel like the ideas are no longer flowing. And then I would move to the outside. I would zoom out and take a look at the megatropolis from the perspective of the motherland and the rest of the campaign world. What do they think about this separation? Are maybe they are planning to stop the megatropolis from separating itself, or maybe they are going to attack it as soon as possible. They do not take kindly to this act of separation. There are many other places in the campaign world, probably. So maybe you belong to there is a non-player character that belongs to a neighboring nation. What sorts of acts to support or hinder the separation are they going to carry out? Maybe they will see this as an opportunity, like I mentioned, to get in touch with a non-player character within the city. Maybe the motherland had some very strict restrictions, rules or laws against people from other places to even they couldn't even enter the megatropolis. So now it is possible for the non-player characters to do so. Maybe that's an excuse for an escort sort of mission, where you are taking this group of non-player characters from other places in the game world into the megatropolis, or taking them from the megatropolis to other places, and you have to fight against some shady groups sent by the motherland to stop such an interaction or union or reunion. And back to the places, maybe the motherland is going to establish new bunkers, bases, outposts to keep watch over what the megatropolis is going to do from now on. So it's all about that back and forth, thinking about the people, places, and objects, how they are going to be affected by the separation. Take a look at things either from inside the megatropolis or from outside, from the point of view of the motherland or the rest of the campaign world, and start creating those connections, those excuses for adventures, quests, side quests. I think it would be a really good idea to also handle things as a sandbox sort of affair, moving freely between the megatropolis and the rest of the campaign world, including the motherland. So I hope this information was entertaining or perhaps useful for you, Orvos. Maybe you are handling things in a completely different way, but either way, when you hear about someone else's ideas about a campaign, an adventure, etc., even if you're not going to use those ideas, maybe it serves as a sort of inspiration or to push further brainstorming for you to handle things even better. Now let's move on to what Diéfersom said about running a campaign setting featuring Star Wars, Game of Thrones, because there are so many beloved franchises and intellectual properties like Battlestar Galactica, Star Trek, Lord of the Rings. Now, the challenging and intimidating thing about those settings is that they have been so very well developed and established throughout the years, throughout decades. So what people enjoy about those settings is consistency and a reality within the fictional setting. People that play in those settings expect to recognize some things that they have seen in movies, comic books, video games, or books featuring that particular famous setting. I think I'm going to create a playlist where I talk about because I have released some videos talking about campaign settings, and in one of those videos, the first one in the playlist that I'm going to create, I also talk a bit more about those settings, those well-established game worlds with popular characters and such. So going back to this situation, yes, it can be quite intimidating because if you as a game master do not adequately present a part of the game world or the background of a non-player character, his attitude or her attitude towards the game world and other characters within the setting, and perhaps something related to technology or magic, if you mess up any of those areas, it really breaks the immersion and people may not feel as excited. They may think that it's just like a carbon copy because of the official setting. Because the coolest thing about those famous fictional worlds is that you feel like you're actually going to interact with the real thing. You will get a chance to talk with those recognizable or famous characters. You're going to be in those legendary places. You're going to be using that staple technology of the setting. So if you do not adequately present any of those aspects to your players, they are going to feel quite disappointed. It's not as dramatic as it sounds. sometimes there is a bit of understanding between the game master and the players, that nobody is completely perfect when it comes to understanding one of those settings. Maybe there are some people that look like walking encyclopedias of those settings, but they still cannot grasp everything perfectly, you could say, especially because we all have our own understanding and vision of those different famous settings. Sometimes things could get even a bit more complicated in sci-fi settings, because now you're not only dealing with specific kingdoms and cities and continents, now you're also dealing with planets and different sectors of the galaxy. So what I would recommend is that you learn as much as possible about 2 or 3 areas of the setting. If it's a sci-fi setting, learn as much as you can about 2 or 3 planets. If it's your typical medieval fantasy setting, learn as much as you can from 2 or 3 kingdoms, or perhaps in the case of Game of Thrones, 2 or 3 noble houses. And then you're going to apply something that I talked about in the other video, that I mentioned that you should learn about some particular conflicts, events, hazards in the setting, because you're going to be using those as tools to steer or move the party of adventurers into those areas where you actually have more knowledge, you have more data, more information to work with. So for example, maybe you have, like I said, a Game of Thrones sort of setting with noble houses, and there are many cool settings with noble houses. So you could be thinking, well, the player characters could be thinking that they want to talk with a member of this house, let's say House Baratheon, but you only know about House Lannister and the Stark. And so what are you going to do? You need to create an excuse so that players get a bit stalled during that session. You still will reward them with experience points or objects that they can obtain. The story is going to move forward, it's going to be developing, but in different directions. So maybe when they're looking for information to locate a specific member of House Baratheon, but they cannot find that person, but they get clues that, well, he was last seen talking with Tyrion. So you go to looking for Tyrion now. Maybe you need to go through some adventures to locate him, because perhaps he's constantly moving depending on the timeline. When you actually locate him, maybe he needs you to do some things for him, because the information is quite valuable. The information concerning that particular non-player character that the party of adventurers are looking for. So you can spend the entire session either using things that you know about of House Lannister, or perhaps you took it in another direction and you took it towards the House Stark or the Greyjoys. But by the end of the session, the party of adventurers will have accomplished many things, and they will feel like they are closer to their goal of meeting this character from House Baratheon. And before the next session begins, perhaps it's the very next day or in a few days, you will have enough time to familiarize yourself with the non-player character that they are looking for, with general information about House Baratheon, etc. So it's all about gently stalling the party of adventurers and steering them towards those areas in which you are knowledgeable. In the case of a sci-fi setting, like I said, maybe Star Wars, maybe you know a lot about specific planets like Tatooine, maybe Cloud City, Yavin. I don't know the exact distances between the planets and other bases and such. But the important thing is that you, like I said, know everything you can about 2 or 3 of them. That will be enough So when the adventurers want to go to a particular planet or to a particular city within the same planet, you can move things towards another adventure, another segment of the setting in which you know a lot about. Perhaps the players want to get their hands on a particular weapon or device, and you do not know where that technology came from, the inner workings of it. You don't know if it's available in the place that the adventurers are visiting. So you could mention something that it is currently out of stock, but there is a clue that someone may actually may contact the player characters with someone who actually sells that particular weapon or gear or device. Maybe you will need the help of a smuggler. So in that way, the adventure is taken towards some areas that you can pretty much run without having to ruin the or mess up the consistency of the setting. Like I said, maybe they want to purchase a ship. Maybe there are no ships available for purchase. Maybe an entire quest could be focused on perhaps obtaining a somewhat decent ship in payment for some other thing. But the main point remains the same. Use your knowledge of the people, places, and objects of a particular section of the setting to guide or move or steer the party in that direction. That's why I consider these situations as composite campaign settings. All of those popular settings featuring Middle Earth, Kryn in the case of Dragonlance, they don't even have to be related to a movie franchise or something. Even Ravenloft and Faerun, there are some places that almost feel like mini campaign settings within a setting. It depends on how you're going to be handling things. And if you get into that mindset, yes, if we get into that mindset, it's going to be very easy for you to move things towards those areas where you know about the people, places, and objects. There is actually an adventure. I don't want to say the name because it's going to spoil everything about that adventure module, but it features a structure that exists in both Faerun from Forgotten Realms and old school Ravenloft. And everything that happens in one side of that structure affects the other side. So as you can see, it is somewhat complex, and it's a perfect example of two settings colliding. Or you could, if you consider the structure as a mini setting, a setting within settings rather than just one setting. And of course, it's also useful, as I mentioned, in Diéfersom, if you are using one of those official systems to run Star Wars or Game of Thrones, or you're homebrewing your own things, or using another system and just using your knowledge about Star Wars, Game of Thrones. You don't have to know everything. Like I mentioned, just 2 or 3 aspects of each setting. After all, we have so many YouTube videos and Wikipedia. It's very easy for you to gather enough information about those 2 or 3 settings to start running a module that you have purchased or that you have designed. And whenever the player characters are taking things quite off rails, let them do it. Let them reach that objective eventually. But first, they will have to go through those areas in the setting in which you know about the non-player characters, the technology, the different sites. So I hope this information was useful, Diéfersom. Like I said, in the case of Orvos, maybe you're handling things in a completely different way, but hopefully these ideas that I presented will spark some sort of inspiration to better handle things. Well, thanks for watching this video. If you have any comments or questions, please let me know. And if you have more suggestions of topics that you want me to talk about in these videos, please let me know in the comments section. And thank you so much to those of you that have been supporting the channel by sending drive-thru RPG gift certificates. If anyone else wants to further support the channel, the information on how to do that will be in the description below. And in case you are not aware, there is actually post-apocalypse sale going on in Drive-Thru RPG. I recommend that you check it out. There are actually 3 bundles. I don't remember the one is dystopian something. There are two role-playing games that I'm forgetting of the bundles, but one bundle features first edition Gamma World. I think that's the one I will hopefully get. I'm still deciding. So I definitely recommend that if you like post-apocalypse games, check it out. Once again, thank you and see you later.